Kicking off at number 5, the Dyatlov Pass incident, which is perhaps one of the most unexplainable mysteries of the modern era as far as intention goes. Granted, I will admit that the Dyatlov Pass incident may not necessarily be explained by an act of the occult, the most likely explanation being a logical yet tragically coincidental accident, but you've got to admit, the red flags are there. On January 25th, 1959, 9 Russian students set out on a journey across the Occult mountain range nestled deep in the northern Urals. They would never be seen alive again. Their tent was originally found by a search party after they'd been missing for over a month. It was found on the uppermost slope of Kholat-Sykyl, or Mountain of the Dead in the native language of northern Siberia. All 9 of the students were seasoned hikers and skiers, yet the scene told a different story. Their bodies were found scattered in various bizarre spots around the tent's location. Some of them had burrowed up to 15 feet beneath the snow. Most of them were naked with a string of bewildering anomalies. One of them, Lyudmila Dubinia, was missing her tongue and eyes. Others had broken bones and massive internal trauma, but perplexingly, no external injuries, not even a scratch. Whatever happened on the Mountain of the Dead remains shrouded in mystery.
Number 4 on this list is Brielle Decker. Brielle's story is one that is truly moving. Brielle is a true hero. Not only did she escape the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints cult, she established a refuge at the cult headquarters after the cult leader was arrested. FLDS, a polygamous cult, was led by Warren Jeffs. During his reign, he forced approximately 80 women and children into marriages. Brielle, who was born into the FLDS, knew from a young age that she would be forced to marry the middle-aged man. When she turned 18, he prepared their wedding ceremony and she had no choice but to go along with it. Around this time, the FBI charged Jeffs for forcing an underage girl into marriage and later conducted a raid on the FLDS compound where they discovered just how many children Jeffs had forced into marriage. Jeffs was, of course, charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The $100 million FLDS fund, which was seized by the government, was partially given to Brielle to buy Jeffs' mansion and turn it into a refuge for victims. Even though she went through some really horrible stuff, Decker's character remained intact. And now she's taken the experience that happened to her and turned it into a way to help all the others who were affected. Big shout out to Brielle. Number 3 on this list is Anna LeBaron. A lot of people get poached at a young age to join cults. It's pretty easy to do that poaching if you can start from birth. Anna LeBaron's father, Ervil, was the leader of a cult that's been linked to over 20 murders. Her father had 13 wives and over 50 children between them all. Anna, in the book that she's written called The Polygamist's Daughter, details how she and the other children were made to feel isolated and were forced to work 12-hour workdays. Her father was wanted by the FBI for organizing the murders of over 10 people. He was eventually captured, but even after his capture, his followers continued to kill. He had made a master kill list and his devout troops were following it. Luckily, at the age of 13, Anna was able to escape with the help of her sister. She went on to go to college and live a relatively normal life, which is kind of crazy to think about considering how her existence started. Number 2 on this list is Clary Ashman. Clary, as many followers of cults are, was poached at a young age and just found herself involved in something that she never wanted to be a part of. The list verse says, Claire Ashman grew up in the very traditional Catholic society of St. Pius X. When she left her family and started life outside the strictly Latin faith, she was confused and unsure of herself. In many ways, she was clueless and uneducated by her family. That explains why, when she turned 15, she was not aware that it was creepy for a 27-year-old man to show interest in her. Unfortunately, without healthy relationships for her to learn from, Claire accepted a marriage proposal from the man. Shortly after their marriage, her husband discovered the Order of St. Charbel, and Claire found herself smack in the middle of a doomsday cult. Claire was even more confused when she was selected as a princess of the church and was destined to marry the cult leader. For 6 years, she grappled with the controlling hand of the church and her husband until one day she got her hands on a book called The Beautiful Side of Evil, which first unveiled the term cult to Claire. She understood at once that she was in a cult and began learning about how to open a bank account, how to sign a lease on an apartment, and how to be free. After learning more about how to survive outside the cult, Claire escaped. She now hopes her retelling of her experiences can help other women find a better life. Imagine getting married to this guy who basically groomed you from when you were 15 and then getting told that you're actually gonna get married off to some other dude. Meanwhile, you have no idea what a bank account is or like actual real life is. It's so good that she found that book and was able to realize that this isn't how life is supposed to go. I can't imagine how bad things would have got if she had never found it. And finally, number 1 on this list is Rebecca Stott. Rebecca is once again another story of someone being born into this and just thinking that this is what life is like until finally being told otherwise. The list first says, author of In the Days of Rain, A Daughter, A Father, A Cult, Rebecca opens up about her upbringing. She and her families were members of a religious cult, the Exclusive Brethren. In an interview with NPR, Rebecca stated that rules were enforced with intense interrogations about your sins and that punishments would often include isolation that could go on for weeks. Rebecca details the anger she was forced to bottle up and how silent she was forced to be around men. When the cult leader, Jim Taylor Jr., was found sleeping with a young married member, the entire cult ruptured. 8,000 members left the cult, including Rebecca's family. But that did not mean her hardships were over. Rebecca described the overwhelmingness of the outside world with a sense of vertigo. All the rules of her old life spun around as she took more and more steps away from their binds. It took a very long time for Rebecca to grow less shell-shocked by the world, and to this day she cannot bring herself to open a Bible, which makes a lot of sense. By the time Rebecca was just 6, she had undergone at least 3,000 hours of forced Bible study. Being born into something like that must be so hard. I imagine that she's dealt with feelings of inadequacy her whole life. Also, getting shoved inside an isolated room for time if you misbehaved is pretty whack, guys, and not something that anybody should want to be a part of. Very glad that Rebecca managed to make it out with her life still left to live.
Kicking off at number 5, Alistair Crowley. Born Edward Alexander Crowley on the 12th of October 1875, this guy is perhaps one of the most well-known occultists in the modern era, who identified himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus, an occultist idea that existence is split into several defined ages of magic that was propagated in Crowley's own founded religion, Thelema. Alistair Crowley was born into a wealthy family in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, which seems to be becoming a theme here at Top 5 Scary Videos because that's also near where I grew up as a kid. Spooky, right? Crowley's life wasn't a boring one, that's a definite, collecting the titles of occultist, magician, poet, painter, novelist, even mountaineer, and was integral in fleshing out the parameters of modern occultism. During a trip to Cairo, Egypt, Crowley claimed to have been contacted by a supernatural entity named Awas that laid out to him the Book of the Law over a 3-day period, the sacred text that formed the basis for Thelema. Crowley believed in the power of magic, spelt with a K, which was an alignment of science and mysticism. He described this magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Coming in next at number 4, the San Francisco Satanic Beheading. On the 8th of February 1989, a homeless man, Leroy Carter Jr., was sleeping rough in the Golden Gate Park of San Francisco. That night he was brutally attacked and murdered. After the authorities arrived on the scene the next morning, they discovered that his head had been cut off. Not only that, but it was nowhere to be found. They scoured the crime scene, but it had appeared that the head was missing. Bizarrely, perhaps the only clue at the crime scene was a headless chicken, which had been partly stuffed into Leroy Carter Jr.'s neck. The San Francisco police were baffled. They called in a specialist, Officer Sandy Gallant, who had built her career around occult crimes. From the beginning, she realized that the murder was perhaps related to a ritual involved in Palo Mayombe, a black magic offshoot of the religion Santeria. Their intention was to make a ritualized brew from Leroy Carter's brain. Strangely enough though, she also predicted that the head would be returned to the crime scene after 42 days, in completion of the ritual. Well, lo and behold, right on schedule, the head was returned exactly 42 days later. However, no one had taken Officer Sandy Gallant seriously, and no one was watching the crime scene to make an arrest. The ritualistic murderer escaped justice, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Next up at number 3, Pauline Picard. And this story is crazy, and we're going all the way back to April 1922 in the rural area of Brittany, France. On one fateful day, little Pauline Picard, who was just 2 years old at the time, disappeared from her family's farm. No one had seen her wander off, and seemingly she had vanished without a trace. All search parties failed to find her, yet strangely enough, a few days later local police received news that a little girl who matched exactly the description of Pauline Picard had been found alone wandering around the town of Cherbourg, which was over 300 kilometers away. Pauline's mother identified her via photograph, and the police were satisfied that it was the same girl. I know, right? This case is absolutely insane, but hold on, because it gets weirder. Because about a month later, a farmer that was walking near the Picard farm stumbled upon the last thing that anybody expected to find. It was the mutilated and decomposing body of a young girl, perhaps 2 years old. Next to her was a pile of neatly folded clothes. When the townspeople arrived, Pauline's parents included, they discovered that the folded clothes were the exact same ones that Pauline had been wearing on the day that she disappeared. It was thought by police that the body had been deliberately placed. The crime scene was pristine. Even weirder though, I told you guys, was the fact that the skull of an adult male had been placed next to the body. If that was Pauline's body, then who was the other kid? What happened to Pauline? And what the hell is going on with that mysterious skull? Well, no one knows, and the strange case of little Pauline Picard remains France's greatest unsolved mystery. Swinging in next at number 2, Jeanette De Palma. On the chilly afternoon of Monday, August 7th, 1972, 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma left her house in Springfield Township, New Jersey, to meet a friend, let her mother know that she was taking the train on the way. She was never seen alive again. After her disappearance, her parents filed a missing person report with the Springfield police, but the case went cold. That is until 6 weeks later, on September 19th, when the skeletal remains of Jeanette De Palma were found at the top of Springfield's Houdale Quarry. This is where things get weird and raises the question of a potential fault in the police investigation. According to several witnesses, her remains were surrounded by a pattern of strange occultist objects, adorned into a coffin-shaped parameter of wicker branches and small wooden makeshift symbols. It is claimed by some residents of Springfield that this pattern was in actual fact a pentagram. Jeanette De Palma's autopsy did not reveal a cause of death, although the coroner suspected strangulation. Even more bizarrely were the high amounts of lead found in her body, yet no explanation for this was given either. Eventually the case went cold, and the tragic murder of Jeanette De Palma remains a mystery to this day. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Bella in the Witch Elm. Who put Bella down the Witch Elm is a common question asked in the West Midlands area of Hagley near Birmingham. I've seen it myself, often written in scrawling graffiti on brick walls. It's a mystery that has perplexed the Midlands for over half a century, yet still remains to be answered. On April the 18th, 1943, 4 young boys went poaching in the woods of the Hagley Hall estate, thinking they'd find some bird nests ripe for picking. After climbing a witch elm tree, the then 15-year-old Bob Farmer made a much more gruesome discovery. Inside the hollow opening of the tree's trunk, wedged tightly inside, were the skeletal remains of a woman, entirely complete save for one missing hand. Police were dispatched to the scene and found it exactly as described. Later, buried near the tree, they found the woman's severed hand along with several items of clothing believed to belong to her. Locals dubbed her Bella, and rumours stirred of a witch's coven, black magic and occultist execution. Police investigation later discovered that the woman, who was believed to be between 35 and 40, had been placed into the tree's hollow while still warm, where she had remained hidden for at least 18 months. Nothing else is known about Bella and how she ended up in the Witch Elm, and it remains one of England's most terrifying occult mysteries.
Number 5 on this list is Sarah Edmondson. Sarah Edmondson is a Canadian actress who's known for her roles on The Vow, Geronimo Stilton, and At Home in Mitford. She's also known for having been part of Occult. Listverse says, Sarah Edmondson, a young actress, had been searching for a newfound purpose in her life when she boarded a cruise designed to explore spirituality. She did not know that it was a front for the infamous cult NXIVM, nor did she know that it would dictate the next 12 years of her life. During her time in the cult, she climbed the ladder into a position that gave her immense wealth. The power she found herself in was exciting, and it was not until she was inducted into the secret subgroup of the cult that it didn't feel like a positive experience. When she was branded with the letters of the founding members of the cult, she decided that she'd had enough. She became a whistleblower on the cult, drawing worldwide attention to the famous actors and actresses involved in the pyramid scheme and trafficking cult. Sarah Edmondson went on to write a book, scarred, but it's a bit troubling. She lured many young women into the cult, but her book seems strangely void of guilt or remorse. Instead, her writing is self-indulgent and gossip-filled. Though she was certainly abused within the cult, she was not blameless for her own wrongdoings. Interesting. If what Listverse says is true, then Sarah might not have been completely from blame for some of the stuff that happened in this cult. I looked into some of what the cult did, and it was not good, guys. This cult was rotten to the core. The founder, Keith Raniere, finally got his though. He was recently sentenced to 120 years in prison.
Coming in at number 4, Marie Laveau. Born Marie Catherine Laveau on September the 10th, 1801 in the French Quarter, Marie Laveau was a Louisiana Creole practitioner of voodoo, renowned across the southern United States and incredibly prolific in the New Orleans area. She was the daughter of Marguerite de Cantal and Charles Laveau Trudeau, a renowned politician. Marie Laveau practiced the arts of root work and herbalism, combined with the conjuring arts of Native American and African spiritualism, gaining her the title of the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. The full extent of her voodoo practicing is unknown, but several historical records state that Marie Laveau traveled the streets of New Orleans with a mystical presence, stirring an air of fear in the locals with her seeing eye of knowledge. It is believed that she was often in the presence of her familiar, a snake named Zombie, thought to be an avatar of the lower god Damballa. Through her divinations and displays of herbalism, she became an important figure in Creole culture, a potent blend of folklore and ancient magics. Next up at number 3, Roger Bolingbroke. And we're going deep into British history to find this guy, who was wrapped up in one of the most renowned cases of alleged treasonous sorcery against the English monarchy. I say treasonous sorcery, but in all reality, all this guy really did was write a horoscope. A magic horoscope that can predict when you die. Yeah. Roger Bolingbroke was a genius, incredibly well educated in the fields of astronomy and astrology. He was also a cleric, a magister, and an alleged necromancer, a practitioner of the arts of the dead, which is where he met his demise. Bolingbroke was part of Humphrey of Lancaster's household, the first Duke of Gloucester, and was the personal magister to the Duke's wife, Eleanor Cobham, who could pretty much have had her own spot on this list all on her own. The two of them, alongside a woman named Marjorie Germain, also known as the Witch of Eye, conspired to divine the death of Henry VI, the then King of England. As you can imagine, things didn't go to plan, and Roger Bolingbroke was hung, drawn and quartered, and his head was stuck on a spike on the London Bridge. With all that power of divination, he didn't see his own death coming. Funny how that works, isn't it? Swinging in at number 2, Ursula Southill, who is definitely someone that saw her own death coming. In fact, she pretty much saw everything coming, if you're to believe the power of Ursula Southill's prophecy. Better known as Mother Shipton, Ursula Southill was born in 1488 and died in 1561, although publication of her written prophecies didn't appear until 1641, 80 years after her reported death. You may already know the legend of Mother Shipton, an ancient woman who allegedly predicted 9/11 and the whole 2012 Mayan calendar thing, the majority of which is pure speculation and fakery from sensationalists. The real legend of Mother Shipton began in a cave in Knaresborough, Yorkshire, alongside the petrifying well, a natural phenomena that causes slow calcification. She was a soothsayer, a wise woman who practiced herbalist medicine, telling fortunes for travellers and writing her esoteric prophecies in scripture for the Yorkshire locals. It wasn't until the Great Fire of London in 1666 that society paid any heed to her, although throughout her life the northern region of Yorkshire had already cemented her power of divination into their folklore. After London had burned to a crisp, a few members of the royal family noticed a stark coincidence. In a book that they'd read, the writings of a long dead Yorkshire mystic who saw in a vision the great city of London burning in the year 1666. And finally, at our number 1 spot, King Solomon. And it has to be perhaps the most mysterious and prominent figure in the whole of occultism. Both the prototype and archetype of the warrior and the magician, King Solomon is most widely associated with the Seal of Solomon, an ancient ring that purportedly had the power to banish and control demonic forces. He appears in many ancient texts throughout history, the Hebrew Bible, the Quran and the Talmud, the central text of Rabbinic Judaism, all of which point to the fact that Solomon was an incredibly powerful and wise figure. In more contemporary themes, he is often associated with Freemasonry and the building of the Masonic Temple. In history though, his story is much more vague, although several texts allegedly allude to the all-powerful artifacts that were bestowed upon him to have control over the mystical arts. Although the most famous is his seal, the others are his key, also known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, a series of coded pentacles often associated with demonology, and his table, a tablet of stone that was said to be held by the Visigoths, yet was lost during the conquest of Iberia, fading into legend.